Okay, I'm here with Dr. Carrie Jones. Many of you guys already know her. She's an expert in many things, and we're going to have a great chance to talk about hormones and endocrinology and uh, functional medicine applications to that. So, Carrie, just let us know your background. How'd you get into all this? What made you passionate about hormones and reproductive health and fertility and all those things that are associated with it?
All the things. Well, what's funny is I tell this story because I think it's relatable to a lot of people. So I actually grew up in Kentucky. I'm not from Kentucky, but I lived there for a number of years. So my health ed class was taught by the high school football coach, and you can imagine what my health ed, sex ed education was. So fast forward, as I was going through college, I was headed towards the conventional route, wanted to go to medical school, become an MD. And I was working in two different hospitals. One where I did a lot of outreach, community outreach. It was blood pressure, blood sugar, diet explanation. Absolutely loved it. The other hospital, I volunteered on the pediatric wing, and it was exactly what you'd expect. Very sterile, very clinical, very pharmaceutical. And I thought, this isn't for me. I don't want to do this. I want to do the community outreach, whatever that looks like. Fast forward, I found naturopathic medicine, went to naturopathic medical school here in Portland, Oregon, and just continued into the hormones, because what I realized is, especially with females, I mean, males too, but so many women just don't know, right? They just don't know a lot about their cycle. They think they can get pregnant every single day of their cycle. Everyone feels hormonal, but nobody knows what that means. And so I continued on my residency in hormones. I worked for Precision Analytical, the Dutch test, for almost 10 years. And now I'm at Rupa Health. So I just keep staying in the hormone lane because that's the thing I know and that excites me.
Fantastic. So I have a lot of hormone questions for you. I think a lot of people are interested in certain topics. Let's start with the adrenals. Let's talk about
Yeah.
the glands, adrenal salivary index, cortisol awakening response. So for what would be the main times you would want to run an adrenal profile? Or do you think it should be done routine on every single patient? Do you think there's certain times for it? And then when do you think cortisol awakening response is most appropriate to run? Because I think a lot of people, when they get to functional medicine, they don't know what to do. Then to order way too many tests, and then by the time they interpret it all, patients confused, they're confused, and then they end up just starting with the gut anyways. And
Right, 100%, exactly. Which, and of course, we know the gut has a huge impact on cortisol and on
right.
your adrenal output. So I do run. A lot of times people want to know, if somebody says I'm stressed out, I feel I can't sleep, or I don't have any energy, I want to know, like, can you do a test to show me? Sure, absolutely, that'd be great. But here's a cheater question that I use for the cortisol awakening response. So sometimes it'll direct me to do the test. Other times I just know to go ahead and treat them. So the cortisol awakening response is that initial response of cortisol that we have in the morning. You wake up, you start to transition from conscious to alert. Bright light of some sort comes into your eyes, and your adrenal glands start to pump out cortisol thanks to ACTH able to bind. The rise in cortisol is very quick. 30 to 45 minutes, you should hit your peak, and then gradually decline through the rest of the day. So my cheater question is this: how long does it take you to move from conscious to alert when you wake up in the morning? And if you say, it takes me about 30 to 45 minutes, I'm like, great. You're in that section of your cortisol, you're probably doing pretty well. But I would argue the majority of people either say one of two things. Well, it takes me about 2 hours and 2 cups of coffee. Or they say, I wake up and immediately go to a 10. I'm anxious, my heart is racing, I feel stressed out, and I'm zinging all over the place. And in either case, either end of the spectrum, I know their cortisol is either not working that well because it's too low, they can't get the response they want, and they're in a fight or flight mode. So the cortisol is like, all right, I need to protect you. Let's just jump up.
Right. Okay, so where does the epinephrine, norepinephrine come in the adrenal medulla? Because we look at cortisol, it's like an ACTH, pituitary endocrine, PVN, hypothalamic pathway.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, epinephrine, norepinephrine, that's really more in autonomic control, and we don't really measure epinephrine, norepinephrine, and the symptoms of cortisol wouldn't necessarily be epinephrine, norepinephrine, and people that are wired may have more one symptom
Yeah.
versus the other. And we look at a cortisol part, we're looking at cortisol. So how do you distinguish?
Well, and you need cortisol to make epinephrine, right? Like we always have low grade levels of norepinephrine, but when we get in that stressed out state, our cortisol starts to go up.
Right.
That helps, right? Then the norepinephrine funnels back through to the adrenal medulla and uses the cortisol, et cetera, to make epinephrine. And as we know, norepinephrine and epinephrine are stored. So that immediate fight or flight response, you are driving and you have to swerve to avoid an accident. that norepinephrine, epinephrine is what comes out. Cortisol comes, he's just slower. 10 minutes, they roughly say that it takes for the adrenals to really pump it out. So usually in that immediate kind of response that people feel, or they'll say, I feel like I'm buzzing, I'm coursing all day long. Then I start to really think, I bet that's more norepinephrine, epinephrine, as opposed to cortisol.
I see. Okay. That's very interesting. And then what about, what about people that have these really weird cortisol rhythms, like you see high cortisol or flatliners, but the ones that look like that can't be physiological, it's just something's wrong. What do you think?
Well, and especially like the opposite folks, right? The people who wake up low and they're like high at night, right? So we have our common in our entrepreneurs, common in our practitioners, common in, new parents. They're exhausted all day and then the kid goes to bed. And so they use that time to clean the house, check email, do all the things, right? Because they're finally like, we've got some time, watch TV, calm down. But yet they've driven their cortisol up because they've given themselves a second win. So they actually have what we call a flip curve, which you talk about, it's the opposite of what you want or what you think when it comes to cortisol.
What about the ones that aren't just flipped? The ones that are like a V shape?
like super wonky. Definitely. I mean, I start to think about things like, stress in the day, but I think a lot about blood sugar. I think a lot about, infection, inflammation. As we know, cortisol's main job, if it had a resume, it's glucocorticosteroids. So that gluco is for glucose production or encouragement. And so looking at that metabolic aspect to it as well, if they're really wonky in the V shape. I actually have people, it can be very situational. The testing is wonderful. I love the testing, but it is also just that one day. So when I sometimes get these crazy, crazy curves, I'm like, what happened here? I mean, I've heard the gamut. I've heard like, well, I broke my arm, or well, that's when my kids get home from school. And, so it can be really crazy Monday through Friday, or, oh my gosh, I got this crazy phone call, but I still wanted to make sure I completed the test. So I went ahead and did the test. Yeah. So which is why I always say to people, to practitioners, when you get the results back, like check in with the patient. Don't just automatically throw them on phosphatidylserine or something like, theanine or something calming, right? Because they may be very situational depending on what's going on in that moment.
Have you seen people like take like skin creams, anti-inflammatories, and also the cortisol is really high?
We see it all the time. No, the great thing about the Dutch test, so I will say this, just having my experience, I don't work there anymore, but just my 9 years of experience there. The urine test will test cortisone as well. And so we can see when somebody's on a hydrocortisone cream, which is of course cortisol, that their free cortisol will be through the roof, but their cortisone will not, which is also the other thing. A lot of people think hydrocortisone, the cream, is the same thing as cortisone, but putting the hydro in front of cortisone is actually the pharmaceutical naming. It's cortisol. It's shocking for even in practitioners. They're like, oh, I thought it was cortisone cream. Like, no, it's cortisol that you're slathering on. So that will absolutely raise their free cortisol in that moment. Same with their partner. Their partner's on it. Let's say they've got, their partner rubbed on, and then they hugged or they touched or what have you, and then they sucked it up. We see that. We see that with all the topical hormones, but cortisol for sure. Right. It just slides right in.
And then have you seen some of the research on like neurodegenerative changes and hippocampus degeneration, abnormal cortisol rhythms? And have you?
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
And people feel it. I mean, how many times have you had a patient say, oh my gosh, I'm having tons of stress? In my practice, working with a lot of women, a lot of it was around, divorce, severe, horrible, terrible divorce. And they're like, I think I'm getting Alzheimer's, dementia. I can't remember anything. My stress is a 10 out of 10. I used to have such a great memory. What's going on? And I'm like, well, the cortisol effect on the hippocampus. Don't worry, hopefully cross fingers, but yeah, this is not uncommon. And we actually saw it a lot in the pandemic where a lot of people were like, of course, completely scared, very stressed out, and started to question their brain function because of that, their memory. Right. Then you put on other hormones on top of it, like as you're transitioning through perimenopause or menopause, and it's unfortunately works since that.
So, okay, so tell me that. So I've always looked at the cortisol profiles. I always thought, okay, cortisol output is a reflection of what the gland is capable of, let's say, theoretically putting out in a day, like their output. Mm-hmm. The rhythm is really more maybe the feedback loop, hippocampus, brain-related mechanisms. And then as we all do, we go deep dives and you see like hippocampus degeneration, you see homocysteine degenerates it. are we really dealing with the neurodegenerative issue, do you think, when we see these really abnormal rhythms? Do you think it's just a stress response and it's a combination of both?
I definitely think it's a combination of both, especially given the amount of neurodegeneration that's being researched and realized nowadays, which is shocking and concerning. That I would say it's a combination of both.
What do you think really does work to get those rhythms back? Do you really think PS does it? Do you really think it? I mean, we have all these theoretical models of nutrition, and then when you actually run profiles with each patient and you see the cocktail of things they're on, you're like, maybe this is working, it's not working. What are your thoughts? Because we all have our own experiences.
For sure. I mean, I saw a lot, and it's become more popular, like the light-based therapy. It's becoming really popular on social media now. So people are getting full spectrum light in the morning, or they're buying full spectrum light boxes. And so I would see more of this rightening, or at least improving. I wouldn't say maybe helped them 100%, where people were really taking their circadian rhythm seriously. So full spectrum light in the morning and then darkness at night. I would especially get that feedback if somebody went, for example, camping, or if they went, to some cabin that was off grid. They took a week to go off grid and came back, and they were like, my circadian rhythm just snapped back. By about the second day, I was sleeping better, deeper, easier. I woke up with energy. And I just have to believe, other than when you truly go off grid, you avoid a lot of the just general social toxins of the world, but that you get that light and dark. Like, you don't really have a choice. You wake up when the sun comes up because the birds are loud, and you go to bed when it's dark because what else are you going to do but hang out by the fire? So even at the core, I do see that light dark, irrespective of the supplements, make a big difference if somebody is willing to stick with it. You don't have to go off grid, but
So like when you look at the applications of getting someone to have let's say a lifestyle that supports a certain circadian rhythm, try to wake at the same time, have the meal at the same time, exercise at the same time. When you implement that in your treatment protocols, how effective do you think that is? What's been your experience with those types of applications?
I think if somebody sticks with it, I think it's at least 50% of the battle. Absolutely. I think it's at least 50% of the battle, especially, and we saw it a lot in the pandemic with a lot of the results that I came back, we went under lockdown and everybody's circadian habits went out the window. They were up late watching Netflix. Everybody watched the Tiger King until 2, 3, 4 in the morning, right? Like a lot of alcohol was consumed because what else are you going to do? And they were testing. So I had the added benefit of being able to see all these tests of people who admittedly were like, I am up late on my phone, watching episodes of Netflix, consuming too much alcohol, eating at random. Now I work from home. I don't even know when lunch is, and I'm kind of a mess. And so as people worked through that, we did see improvement. It may not be, again, 100%, but
50%.
Get that at least 50% is pretty solid.
So let's go through some of the list. What do you think, what role do you think phosphatidylserine would play? What percent impact?
Ooh. Great. Oh my gosh. I do like PS. I mean, it is one of my favorites for somebody who has high cortisol. So I think that's a strong contender. I think that can definitely help when you've got high cortisol. I don't find that PS, I mean, maybe you would disagree. I don't find that it helps if somebody's cortisol is high for like blood sugar reasons or actively fighting an infection. I definitely find it more helpful for that truly stressed out person.
Okay. So PS is one of your favorites on that list.
Yeah.
What do you think about adaptogens? Or do you think adaptogens, like one special adaptogen, or do you think they should be taken together? What are your thoughts?
I do like adaptogens. I'm learning more and more about adaptogens just from a I guess like a true herbalist point of view. Some people think they're all the same, and we know that they're not. You might use rhodiola differently than you would use ashwagandha, which is shocking to a lot of people. Rhodiola can be quite stimulating. Rhodiola can be drying. I've seen it firsthand. Yeah. So if you are a very tired, very night sweaty menopausal woman, rhodiola might be great for you, but not so great for you if you are dry eyes, dry vagina, dry skin, and you're taking copious amounts of rhodiola because you read it's great on a blog. And so that's what you keep taking. So I do love the adaptogens. Absolutely. But I am not, all adaptogens are the same.
Right. Exactly. And the adaptogens may have different effects based on other adaptogens you're taking, like a synergistic effect or.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what do you think about glandulars?
I'm a big fan of glandulars. Yeah, I was taught glandulars right from the get-go when I was in school, and I saw them work. I think they're effective. I'm not afraid to use them. I know they terrify a lot of practitioners, especially the new practitioners, but back in the day when I thought they were great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously for for depleted states, I don't use glandulars for excessive states.
Sure. So, so what are your like top 5 cortisol abnormal rhythm applications as far as nutraceuticals go? Phosphatidylserine.
Oh, sure. So I do use phosphatidylserine, like in the calming aspect. I'll do even like brain support. So I'll use like something that's maybe has bacopa in it, like use that for just overall brain health. I do like theanine. Sometimes I find people underdose in theanine, but just getting that calming aspect for the cortisol. Holy basil is another favorite of mine, especially because you can get it as a holy basil tea, for those tea drinkers or for inexpensive. So those are some of the calming things. And then for the stimulatory, if they need a lot of support, like we already said, I do like glandulars. I do use licorice. I use licorice. I don't use high amounts of licorice. I'm careful with my licorice, but I do find it seems to play well. It's synergistic with a lot of other herbs, I've had herbalists teach me that. But I also do like licorice. On certain tests, you can actually see the enzyme that actually activates or deactivates cortisol is 11 beta HSD. So, right, licorice helps push you into the cortisol range. So if you're a cortisone dominant person, meaning you largely inactivate, licorice is great for you. Licorice is not really great for you if you're already an activator. So you just can't make cortisol, but what you do make is active, and licorice actually probably isn't going to help you as much as maybe a glandular, some sort of stronger adaptogen. When it comes to that.
Let's talk about so we talked about nutraceuticals, like we talked about restoring circadian rhythm issues with lifestyle. What about blood sugar? What role does blood sugar play in the rhythms controlling it? What percentage of that would you say?
A lot. I used to, when I would lecture, back when we could lecture more in person all the time, I would say, if you can't fix your blood sugar, you're not going to fix your cortisol, because if your blood sugar's swinging all around, and I'd probably largely learn that from you 17 years ago at some of your early conferences when you would teach them live way back when. Yeah. I saw you live lots of times way back in the day when you were just starting out. So
I thought we first met in that Australia conference. I didn't know.
That's when we first actually met, but how long I've actually been following you is different.
Okay.
A little bit different. So yes, I think blood sugar, if your blood sugar is a mess, it's cortisol's main job, right? It's gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis take part in both. And so it's going to constantly be it's just going to screw it up more if you can't get your blood sugar under control.
So so let's talk about some of the mistakes I think we both see, which is like people do an adrenal profile and they just try to just only throw supplements at it, and they ignore the issue, they ignore the lifestyle circadian rhythm issue, they ignore factors like sleep. But those are really the heavy hitters, right? Like those are
I mean, it's the basics. I don't know who coined this phrase, but I hear it all the time. Like when did we stop treating adults like toddlers, right? Like toddlers need to be on babies, they need to be on a schedule, right? And they need to go to sleep and they need to get a solid sleep, and they need to be consistent with the rhythm. And we've got to be careful with what we feed babies and toddlers, because it'll affect their mood, and it'll affect their energy, and it'll affect, all these things. Adults are the exact same way. We're the exact same. Why did we stop taking naps, and why did we stop thinking that we needed to go to sleep at a certain time? We need a wind down routine. Somebody should probably read us a book, and then tuck us into bed. Adults need that same foundational work, and it's amazing what it will do for the circadian rhythm and cortisol.
Sure, absolutely. And then what do you think exercise fits into that?
So that is a big topic. So, and I get asked it a lot, just having had worked for a lab. I do see a lot of excessive exercisers. And I think that definitely can screw them up. I had a woman write me. She said, I'm doing Soul Cycle class in the morning, and then I have a Peloton bike at home, and I do Peloton at night. Do you think that's too much? And I was like, I do. Yes, actually, I sure do. Sometimes, and I don't mean to pick on the CrossFitters, but they're a great extremist example where sometimes these CrossFitters, I had a patient who was an extreme marathoner. She liked to run marathons for a hobby. God bless her. And she couldn't figure out why her hormones were a mess, so she couldn't sleep while her hair was falling out. Her periods were crazy. And so I do feel like exercise can be nutritive. It can be stress reducing for some people. But then if it's a bell curve, once you get on the other side and you're taking it to the max, you're actually doing yourself more harm than good.
Like if you're overtraining, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the things I've done, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it, is when I have people that have a like low cortisol awakening response, I'll have them like wake up in the morning and just get their heart rate up as soon as they can and try to,
Yep.
have you ever done anything like that? I think it's
Absolutely. Absolutely. Get up, even go for a walk, right? I'm like, just, put your hair in a bun, go outside, put your shoes on, go for a little walk, or even just go outside, do some jumping jacks, do some stretches. And the reason outside is you want that full spectrum light, and you don't want it through a window. You want to actually, don't look at the sun. Don't, hurt your eyes. Don't be stupid, but getting that full spectrum light, get a little bit of movement can be really helpful, because you're just trying to tell the brain, as you know, in the morning we get up, in the morning we get up, and in the morning we get up and we make cortisol. And so you're trying to work with the rhythm, a little bit of rhythm that you have, and continue to encourage that. And it doesn't have to be crazy exercise, 10 minutes.
I think yeah, for sure. I think one of the challenging things we all face is like we don't know sometimes when we see abnormal rhythm, abnormal cortisol patterns, is it just that the rhythm needs to be reestablished, or is there something still driving it? And then you're trying to search for something that's driving it, and then you're not really sure. And
Right.
how do you handle that? What do you do for that?
Honestly, I think a lot of it is their story, their symptoms, their history, maybe other blood work that I'm looking at, to help me decide, is this just a disrupted rhythm because of the choices that you're making, or is there something a whole lot deeper based on maybe prior blood work? Maybe, I'm the fourth doctor that you've seen, and you keep having these symptoms, and just like, you had said in the beginning, you come in, you're on a boatload of adaptogens, none of it seems to be working. It's like, okay, this is deeper than just some stress and a dysfunctional rhythm. There's something else going on,
Yeah,
whether it's infection, inflammation, something, blood sugar.
right. It's a really important point you're making, is that if they're doing everything right, they're taking something and it's not responding, then
Yeah.
something driving it.
And we see those patients, don't we? We have patients who come in and you go through their diet plan, and you're like, wow, you eat better than I do. Like their hydration, like their schedule is great. Their exercise is just the right. They wear the wearables, so you can actually see what they're doing, their heart rate variability, their sleep, all the things. And you're like, so those 16 bottles of adaptogens and vitamin C and B, like, that's not really helping, huh? I think dig deeper.
I don't know what you think, but I think like that's probably your second test, or maybe even the test after an application, is maybe your most diagnostic, because then you're seeing if they respond or not respond. And if they don't respond, maybe it clues you until you miss something, or something else is the driver.
Yeah.
Great. But I think we tend to emphasize focusing on that first test and then throwing everything at them, and then like, oh, we figured it out. Like, not really. You got to see what happens on a follow-up test.
Right. Yeah. Or even just, I hate to say it like this, but common sense. I had a practitioner whose patient had rheumatoid arthritis, and it was largely under control, as in like the flares and the pain and everything, and was in happened to get into a rheumatoid arthritis flare, terribly red, inflamed joints. They decided to do a cortisol hormone test, and lo and behold, surprise, the cortisol was really high. And the practitioner said, I'm going to put them on, lots of phosphatidylserine, and I'm going to do all these suppressive things because that cortisol is probably damaging. And I said, well, actually, they're in a massive rheumatoid arthritis flare. Maybe the cortisol is being helpful if you suppress their cortisol. It was female. I said, she may actually feel worse than better. He said, nope, I'm going to put them on all the suppressive stuff and see how it goes. A week later, the practitioner called me and said, I screwed up. I made her worse. Apparently she needed that cortisol to do its anti-inflammatory job. She was having a normal physiologic response to what was happening. Her cortisol was high because she had a massive fires in all of her joints. And I was like, lesson learned. Right. Okay. But you won't know until, I just had a little more experience than he did to say, maybe don't do that quite yet. Maybe go after the rheumatoid arthritis, what's triggered the flare, and the cortisol will die down on its own. He opted the other route. Right. I was right.
What's your experience, and how often do you think you should retest? I mean, I think everyone's got different opinions. What have you found to be useful for yourself?
So I am really conscious of people's budget. And so what I usually say is, if you get to the 3 or 4 month mark and you feel great, everything you're doing is working, they're like 75, 80% plus better, then write it out, keep going, let them continue to heal. It's going to take time. If you get to that 3 to 4 month mark and they're not feeling that great, things really aren't moving, I don't know that I would necessarily retest cortisol, but hopefully within there, knowing that they're not doing better, you're going to go in other directions. You're going to have to turn over more stones and do additional testing.
So why wouldn't you retest cortisol? That's what tell us more.
Well, So you can't, I mean, you definitely can retest cortisol, but let's say you've tested cortisol. That was one of your first go-to treatments or testing. And you've got them on some sort of plan protocol. And 3 months later, they're like, I don't really feel any different. Would you continue? I don't know that I would use their money, depending on their budget, to retest cortisol, knowing they don't really feel that different. Or I may decide we missed something. We may have to do, just like you said, that second test. That next level of the onion and look there. Yeah. Now hormones might be different. If estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, those hormones I may actually retest to see how much of the needle we have budged. Cortisol, I feel is a little different.
Okay. So let me have two really important questions too. I think I'm confused about two, and I've always thought about for the first few years of my practice, I ran routine blood work and for an adrenal salivary index in every single patient. So I spent a lot of time finding maybe some of these things don't work, some things do work. So there's so much variety. There's so many layers of complexity to cortisol. And so one of the questions I have is, what about stress? I mean, we all say like stress is bad, but if you don't have stress, I mean, physiologically, you end up with the massive depression. So people have to have some type of stressor.
Right.
One is like, just like running, some people run and over time their body adapts to stress and then they become more efficient. See someone who's like training like crazy, their cortisol profile is no problem. Then you see someone whose body has, let's say, adapted to something like that, and they, let's say, for example, go on a run and they're trying to run and they're overtraining and they're just not even getting a mile or something, and they're all over the place. So over time, if that person kept running, their stress adaptation can change. And it's like, where does physiological stress adaptation come in? Because there's definitely some people that can do more tasks than others. Maybe some have like crashed and suffered until they develop some of that adaptation, and then some that can handle very little. What have you noticed with that? Because obviously stress isn't always bad. You have to have some degree of stress, and then how do you judge and what do you?
Well, your analogy is actually really good. So if you're comparing running to something like trauma, that's causing stress, I think that's kind of an obvious, right? That's kind of an obvious. If somebody's like, I'm my marathon runner, right? Where she was like, I run marathons for a hobby. I'm like, well, you love it and you're running better and you can run entire marathons and do well, but it's really taking its toll on your body from a health point of view. It's screwed up your hormones, your cortisol, your sleep, your hair, all the things. So while you have adapted in some response, you haven't adapted in others. Now, if somebody else has a major stress response due to some sort of trauma, I feel like that's much more concerning, right? Like that's where I'm like, oh no, I don't want you to keep going through the trauma to come out the other end stronger, more resilient, like your rubber band is supercharged now. We need to go through the appropriate channels for whatever the trauma is. So those are kind of my two big, depending on the patient in front of me. I had a lot of patients that just felt like they were treading water. They felt like everything in their life, even if nothing was trauma, it was just family, job, kids, stress. Now you throw in a pandemic, toxins, the world, et cetera, et cetera. And they would literally come in and go, my head is barely above water most days. And it's really starting to affect their daily living, their relationships, their job status. I think that's really concerning. Even if they're like, I don't understand why I can't handle it, but yet my sister can, or my neighbor can, or, my husband does, or our partner does better than me. Like you are an N of one, like we just have to look at you. And if you feel like you're just treading water and you're close to drowning, like we need to address this right now. Yeah. So I do find, I think stress, you can't get rid of it. I agree with you, right? Like there's that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But like sometimes I feel like people are, like I said, sort of just treading water and sort of dipping under the water sometimes. And so it is definitely, as a practitioner, it takes time and skill. And
I mean, I've had the experience personally where I've seen triathletes completely fall apart, with it. And then other times some other athletes and they're totally adapted. And I'm like, okay, that's why you're world class, because you're training like these other people that are falling apart. I mean, you have physiologically adapted. I don't know how.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a response. And, stress is one of those things. It's the ultimate cop out. Less like, oh, he's just getting older, or oh, he's just stressed out.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
it's like, but there's the change in that rhythm, and that becomes important. So
Right.
what
And we
about,
talk about resiliency, right? We talk about resiliency. Resiliency was kind of the word the last couple of years, for sure.
yeah,
Like, how resilient are you? And there's resilient. There's people who come through stress, like big projects or a move or job changes or, birth of a baby, like, sure, that's definitely stressful. But you're going to come out of it, hopefully better, stronger, happier. So that's the kind of stress that I like, as opposed to, really damaging stress.
yeah, it seems like you build resiliency by just little steps over time versus
Yep.
a huge step.
Like falling off the cliff and hoping you survive. Yeah.
So last question about adrenals, because I have all these questions I always have, and I always want to talk to the people that are thinking about it. Like I, so what do you think about the pregnenolone steel? Is it just?
I don't agree with the pregnenolone steel. Here's why I don't agree with the pregnenolone steel. Because when you are making a steroid hormone and you make it in the mitochondria, and star protein binds, cholesterol turns into pregnenolone, that happens in the mitochondria of the cell of the gland you're going for. So are you making progesterone? It's happening in the ovaries. If you're making testosterone, it's in the testicles. If it's adrenals, or cortisol, it's in the adrenals. So to my knowledge, and if you know different, being a researcher, correct me, to my knowledge, mitochondria don't steal from each other. And so it's not like if I needed to make cortisol, that my adrenal glands are going to steal the pregnenolone out of my ovaries and use it to produce cortisol in the adrenal glands. Now, does that mean pregnenolone as a supplement doesn't work? No, I totally think it can work. It works great as a neurosteroid. It works great at the brain. But I don't think if you give pregnenolone, it will insert itself into the mitochondria and then continue on the sex hormone production chain.
Right.
But if you disagree, let me know.
Well, I don't know, to be honest with you, because the pregnenolone steel is a theory based on the phenomena of seeing someone under stress and having the reproductive hormones go down, which we know does happen. Right?
Mm-hmm, totally.
That response is real. We all see it. It's lots of reported publications on that. The pregnenolone steel is just an attempt to explain that theory of there's only so much pregnenolone production, and maybe the shunts to this other pathway. And then I thought, okay, and then people come out and say that's all ridiculous because no research on it. And then I thought, okay, well, how would you even design that study? How would you actually look at what's happening between the pregnenolone and understanding the stress response? So you can't. So it's kind of like I don't think we'll ever know. But
well, we also know. I mean, right? We also know that extreme stress is one of the negative feedbacks.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, up to kisspeptin and GnRH to be like, ooh, no, do not make. Just like don't even make progesterone, estrogen, testosterone right now. Let's focus more on.
Well, for sure, if it was only pregnenolone steel, everyone would take pregnenolone and they wouldn't get into these reproductive hormones going down, which doesn't happen. So it's definitely not the thing, right? And then also, we know with current research that inflammatory cytokines that impact the HPA axis are probably playing a bigger role in suppressing output of reproductive hormone feedback loops and so forth. So, so it's just interesting just how as we learn more how things come out and then some research questions that we never answer, we have to try to explain it what we see, but that's the level of confusion I think we all have because you're an educator, I'm an educator. I'm like, well, what's accurate? And then you try to read stuff. Not accurate. What are you doing?
Well, the other thing too is the steroid pathway. Whenever you look at a steroid pathway, it's just a sheet of paper or it's a slide on a PowerPoint. And so it makes sense. I mean, when I was taught the pregnenolone steel playback 2004, 2005, because we were staring at this steroid, the steroid pathway on a piece of paper where it shows all of the pathways through all of the glands on just one condensed piece of paper. And so it's easy to say, oh, of course, your pregnenolone is going to shift down to cortisol and you're going to have less of progesterone. So that's how my teachers would explain on pointing to the PowerPoint. And I was like, oh yeah, on this, this PowerPoint, that makes sense. But 3-dimensionally, I'm like, wait a minute. Is that really how it works? Do we have big reservoirs of pregnenolone? Because do they steal from each other?
I don't know either. And I think it's a hard question, but it was a theoretical explanation of what the physiology was. The physiology is people under stress, and males testosterone levels drop, females FSH. Estrogen. Yeah. Get altered, FSH, LH get suppressed. All these things that take place.
Yeah. But I do agree pregnenolone works. I mean, I think pregnenolone is, people as a supplement, I have definitely seen improvement. People are calmer, they sleep better. that has helped with rhythms and stuff. So I know it works. But I know it's a neurosteroid too, right? Pregnenolone turns into aloe.
And have you seen it make it worse?
Have I seen them make people worse? Honestly, yes, I have seen it make people worse, especially females who have tried progesterone, felt worse on progesterone, and also felt worse. Then they switched to pregnenolone. Yeah. And so they just seem to be bad with that group of hormones. And one of the theories on that is that especially like think of PMDD. So one of the current theory is that with PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, that their GABA receptors, their subunits, can't shift like pistons in a car fast enough to handle the neurosteroid changes. So GABA or aloe, which is allopregnanolone coming from progesterone or actual pregnenolone itself, is bombarding the GABA receptor, and the GABA receptor being kind of broken, can't handle it. And as a result, you get this GABA dysfunction and PMDD. So it's possible if you've taken pregnenolone and you're like, I feel worse, right, you may, at a brain level, those receptors can't actually handle the influx of the extra pregnenolone, which the aloe as it crosses in through the brain. Right. I don't actually know that 100%, but knowing what I know about PMDD and the current theories on that, I was like, I bet that's one of the reasons.
Yeah. For me, endocrinology is a very tough topic because there's so many variables, there's so many factors, so many things we don't know. Hormones have different effects on different receptor sites based on variables like neurochemical pathways and other hormones. And then you have like certain degrees of SNPs of certain hormones. Yeah. Others, and then you have hormone clearance issues, and then you have like endocrine disruptors and all these things that get in place, and it's all over the place. And then you have labs, blood, urine, saliva that are all kind of looking at different things, and then you're looking at potential metabolites, and then you're looking at things you can't even measure that might be having receptor effects that are not on the panels.
Things we don't even know about yet.
Walk into the world of like, okay, what do you do with hormones? And then within that world, there's like the anti-aging group that should be peak level. And then there's ones that, no, I don't want to do anything bioidentical because those levels are never stable. I don't trust them. And I have to use synthetic, and the traditional Premen Provera route is the only thing you need to do. Right. And then it's like, everyone's got their different theories. And I've always I have family members and friends go, where do I go see? It depends what model do you want?
Yeah.
What model are you looking for? Do you want to go natural replacement? Or do you don't want to go natural replacement? Or like, what are you looking to do? Are you trying to like optimize your athletic performance? Are you trying to change your physical appearance? Are you trying to balance out? So is there, and when we look at these different ranges and different lab tests, and when you take a big look and take a step back, I'm sure you've done it too. You're like, then we try to create like a model that works for us so we feel comfortable, and then accept the model. But is that model really real, or is it just what we help?
No, I mean, I definitely, especially because like maybe the way that I practiced when I had a practice compared to the anti-aging model. So having just come from the big anti-aging conference that was in Florida last weekend, what they're promoting, the levels are promoting, for example, one of the speakers was talking about DHEA, in the blood. And he said, no matter what, your DHEA should be above, DHEAS should be above 600. And I was like, okay, maybe. But what happens if you hear that and you immediately go and you buy DHEA and you pump yourself full of DHEA because this expert told you for anti-aging purposes, you need to have high levels of DHEA, and like poof, you now have hair loss and cystic acne and hair growth in places you don't want, so now what do? Now you have to, it's just this domino effect. So it may work and it may not work. And I've had people go in DHEA and tell me, I feel horrible. I'm angry. I can't sleep. I have a total opposite effect of where's the anti-aging part of it?
And that's the thing is like the people just come up with their own theories about everything all the time. And just like this guy's like DHA should be this level. You're like, why? And the individual uniqueness has gotten. I think that's one of the benefits of doing lab work, because you can kind of compare with their symptoms and see how they're doing. Now, you worked with Dutch. You did a lot of metabolites, but
I did a lot of metabolites.
Then serum and urine, like, the way I've always taught it was, serum testing is, there's advantage and disadvantage of all types of testing. Serum testing has some advantages because we can measure a lot of different hormones we can't measure in other ways, and we can measure things like pituitary hormones, and we can measure things like binding globulin, like sex hormone binding globulin, thyroid binding globulin, and cortisol binding protein, and albumin, and we can measure get a good reflection of what the glands are making because they're protein bound and free. And saliva is always free fraction, which is a disadvantage. But saliva, we can measure circadian rhythms, and we can do things we can't do with serum. That'd be difficult. And urine, we're looking at metabolites. Metabolites are, a reflection of what's being produced, but also strongly influenced by renal and hepatic clearance.
Yep.
Those variables and those factors. And by the way, I taught that once, and I was teaching this model, and then Mark from Dutch is like, "Are you talking bad about our lab?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
I remember that.
I'm like, "I'm not talking bad about your lab. Just telling you like metabolites." And then I also said, "Listen, I go, why would anyone do a urinary cortisol test when there's thousands of papers on salivary now, and you guys haven't justified it yet?" And I noticed Mark just published a paper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So that's great. It's stepping in the right direction. But these are all the like testing factors. So do you have a preferred form of testing? Do you think, what do you like to do? Yeah. Let's say a male comes in and they have andropause symptoms or symptoms. What do you like? Do you like to test all of it? What's feasible? How do you do it?
Yeah. So I do what's feasible. Obviously, having worked for Dutch for 9 years, I'm well versed on the lab for sure. But I know with especially, males, gold standard in a functional medicine practice, I should say. We're looking at total testosterone, free testosterone, SHBG, the estradiol, like some of these other markers, and DHT if you need to. And so can you do those in blood? 100%. So if somebody says, I want to run it through my insurance, or I need to group it in as few tests as possible, I'm like, great, let's get your blood drawn. Let's go. Which may be a little different than maybe I have somebody who's estrogen metabolites as an example. Obviously, there are a lot of estrogen metabolites we don't pick up, we don't have the testing for, but the ones that we do, like the hydroxy and methoxy, we do the best what we can with. So I have somebody with the history, breast cancer, concerned about breast cancer, on some sort of estrogen HRT, looking to see what their metabolites are doing. Somebody with a lot of those estrogenic type symptoms. And I'm looking like, how are you clearing it through with knowing the metabolites that we do know, and how can we shift and adjust these? That's when I definitely like to add in the metabolites.
For a male?
Well, male or female. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I think with males, estrogen gets forgotten in the conventional world. Estrogen seems to be getting forgotten a lot in them. And they're often shocked when I tell them, well, first of all, you do make estrogen. And second of all, your estrogen also goes through some sort of metabolism. And so you can be affected negatively, similarly to the way that a woman can be affected negatively.
What about postmenopause? What do you find? What do you like to do with postmenopause? Just your personal preference as a clinician. What do you prefer?
So because a lot of the postmenopausal women want to start on, often, some sort of HRT, hormone replacement therapy, I would actually start with the Dutch test because they do have the published postmenopausal ranges. And I want to know what their metabolites, the estrogen metabolites as we know them are, before I put them on estrogen. Like, what are we up against as far as we know before you go on some sort of hormone replacement therapy? So if they're already favoring a pathway I'm not thrilled with, then we hopefully, cross fingers, can work to adjust that.
Are you just looking at the 2:16 ratio, or are you looking at what are you?
I even look at the 4. So I look at the 2, 4, and 16. So I'm looking at all of them. So we know that 16 is estrogenic. Papers have been published to show if you go into menopause having a higher amount of 16, you're less risk for osteoporosis because of 16's binding ability on the estrogen receptor. But we also know it can cause things to grow. So if you have breast cancer, we don't want to further add fertilizer to what's going on. But the 4 pathway, as far as what we know in the literature, is that if it continues on, becomes what's called a semi-quinone and then a quinone, now we're at risk for that DNA damage, and we want to use glutathione or sulforaphane based stuff to help stop the process.
So do you ever use saliva testing? Do you prefer saliva testing for certain?
Again, 9 years with the Dutch test, I'm pretty urinary trained. However, I will say my all through school, my residency, and then up for several years in practice, I only use saliva testing. So I use saliva testing. I still like saliva testing for cortisol. I only like saliva testing for the cortisol awakening response. I don't obviously use blood or urine for that. So I can, and when people bring me their saliva results to review, I don't have any issue going over it with them. That's fine.
Yeah.
But when you work for a lab and get free testing, like that's what you run on yourself.
Well,
That's
and
what you do.
an expertise of saying hundreds and hundreds or even thousands
Yes.
of pounds,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
comfortable that you're used to. And
Yep.
it's normal for all practitioners to have a preference of one, but then know what strengths and weaknesses of certain.
Exactly. That's what I would tell people. I know the pros and cons to both kinds of testing. If you do saliva or if you do urine, no, there's, as you said right in the beginning, there's no perfect test, unfortunately. As Mark at Dutch says, all of them are looking in different windows of the same house.
Yeah, and yeah, and it is like as an educator point of view, you have people go, well, why would I do anything besides saliva? Why would I do anything besides urine? Or like, I'm only testing blood tests, total protein. I don't care about free. You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
Don't get too.
I love it. Whoa. And I would get asked a lot, well, why can't you do sex hormone, any of the binding globulins, SHBG? Why can't you do that in urine? Why don't any of the urine companies have it? I said, because it's long degraded, but by the time it hits your kidney, it's done. Like, we can't find it in urine. So that's not the lab's issue. That is your body is done with it.
And so what do you think about lab ranges? Because basically labs are making up their own ranges.
Yeah. Especially because they're calling it like they're healthy, normal. And when you look at a lot of America is not that healthy. So then it's concerning.
Also, when you look at like LabCorp, the ranges are so broad.
Yeah.
Like 1 to 400. You're like, that's almost everything. I mean, exaggerating.
Right. And well, I mean, look at it, look at ferritin, like some of these markers, you're like, if you're 2, you're still you're in the green. And if you're 399, you're still in the green, but yet everyone knows, that's a huge mark. So that's,
so how do you interpret that in? Because if you critically look at hormones, okay, all these labs have different ranges. These labs are coming up with their own ranges. And then we have very broad ranges. We have narrow ranges. We have some labs making their own ranges based on people being on progesterone cream, like MR02 was doing that a while ago.
Yeah, they still do. Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, so now you have that. Then you have someone telling everyone they should take DHEA at 600 milligrams. Should take Previn Provera. And ultimately, the person trying to learn how to balance the patient's hormones that then walks into the world of functional medicine is like, I'm confused. Whoa. And I think the first thing to let people know is like, we're all confused.
Yeah, I was just going to say, join the party. We're doing the best that we can. Some of us just have a few more years on you.
The best we can. We accept that there's all that level of confusion. You have to stick to some kind of baseline test, application, repeat the exact same test, and correlate your symptoms with their outcomes and their changes and kind of go from there. Is that?
Yeah. And I often say that, the like age ranges, a lot of hormones have age ranges, testosterone in males, for example. And I'll say, age range and optimal range may not be the same range. So if you've got somebody and their age range has them as a 50-year-old man and they feel, and they're 50, so they're in their actual age range, but they have all the symptoms of low testosterone, they feel terrible, low libido, erectile dysfunction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously you're going to be doing other workup on them, but I'm like, just because they fit in the age range doesn't mean that it's the optimal range for them. For them. And we know testosterone's ranges have been declining. Not only have male testosterone levels been declining over the years, but they've had to adjust the ranges to go with it. They're like, like LabCorp is like, oh crap. In the last 20, 30 years, we've actually had to drop what's considered normal because testosterone ranges or testosterone is dropping.
Right. When they're doing bulk of analysis in the population.
Yep.
Assuming that it's normal.
Yeah.
So you get more to the confusion. And then let's talk about how topical hormones impact all these tests differently, right? Like
yes.
So not topical or oral or pellets. They're going to have different
injection,
all these different things.
Sublingual, vaginal.
Vaginal, right? So let's talk about vaginal creams, for example.
Yeah, so that's a confusing one because people will
urine. What are you going to see different?
Well, and it depends on how you apply it. So vaginal meaning, so some people think you just apply it on the outside on the vulva, which is very different than applying it in the first third of the vagina versus inserting it all the way up there. So the all the way up there part of the vagina acts like a mucous membrane. It's like a straw and it sucks it right up. Whereas the outside, the vulva, is similar to the skin on your arm, for example. It doesn't suck it up nearly as well. So if somebody's just externally applying cream, maybe they have vulvodynia, labial atrophy, that is going to affect a little bit differently than inserting it all the way inside the vagina. And so the vagina, though, all the way in the vagina, the mucous membrane, that does actually absorb it really well. So it will show up really well on the testing on what you're choosing, which is different from my understanding than if you were just to apply it like on your inner arm.
Okay. So if you had, let's say proper absorption of vaginal estradiol, would it be different between total estradiol and serum, free estradiol and serum, saliva or urine metabolites? What would you see?
My understanding is that, serum and urine based on the literature is more similar. Whereas saliva, I tend to find even with vaginal and topical, that the saliva levels are really high, like really high, so they have to adjust the ranges to be up in the thousands to account for that, what comes through the saliva gland.
But that's the thing is adjusting for the range like what some labs do. That's just a number, but what's happening?
Yeah,
receptor site.
Exactly. And I think that's the big problem when you look at the literature on, if you're a woman and you're on estrogen and you still have your uterus, you have to be on progesterone. And as far as we know right now, oral progesterone or vaginal progesterone are the only two routes that are actually going to protect you from uterine hyperplasia. Topical progesterone, there is not a study where they actually look at the endometrial layer to see if you put topical progesterone cream on your arm and then they, do a vaginal ultrasound or a vaginal biopsy to make sure that the stripe in the uterus is going to stay nice and thin. Now, the levels will be through the roof. Topical progesterone will cause saliva levels to go up really high. That's why they adjust the ranges. But to my knowledge, there isn't research that says topical. Now, there is a study that often gets quoted, but it's quite weird. They did topical on the breast tissue, but then they did a breast biopsy and they were like, yep, it's in the breast. I'm like, well, yeah, obviously that's where you put it. So that often gets quoted as topical progesterone works and hits the receptors because this breast study showed it. I'm like, well, it should be. That's where progesterone's loves the fat, extremely high, lipophilic there. So it's going to stay there.
Well, I mean, the reality is there's not really research published on this, and in the conventional model, they just put people on Prem and Pravera, and that's it. They don't really recheck and just make sure that they're
yeah. And I've had many a conventional OBGYN, for example, who's like, I don't even bother to test. They come in, they tell me I have hot flashes or vaginal dryness or whatever, and I just put them on hormones. And why would I test them? I'm like, oh, okay.
We don't have major departments like searching for these answers or looking
right.
at it. We're all confused because we don't know, like, where's the research? Well, there isn't much.
Right.
So what about topical? So if someone's taking like an androgel or a female taking a progesterone cream, if we know for sure the saliva levels are like off the charts.
Right. So there has been actually some conventional literature looking at topical in blood and in urine to show that it's, again, there's no perfect way. Topical is a pain, which I know the saliva companies would argue completely opposite of what I'm saying. The saliva companies,
I think it's just one company
argue, right? Like, well, it is just, okay. Yeah. There is just one company that argues that it is, it's solid, when the rest of us are kind of arguing it's actually not that solid. Topical is a pain. And the reason topical is a pain is that any topical hormone is lipophilic. It loves fat. Progesterone is the most lipophilic. And that's the one that most often is used topically. So it's going to stay right there in the fat tissue and it's going to leak out, or blurp out in various levels. It's not like a patch, which is kind of steady state all the time. And then estrogen is less lipophilic. So it's that you can, and then testosterone is even different from that. And so you can't even across the board say, well, I found this study on testosterone, topical testosterone. I'm going to apply it in theory to topical progesterone. It's like, you can't do that because progesterone's so lipophilic, it loves fat tissue. So you will hear practitioners advocate to apply progesterone in the fatty area, on the belly and the thighs, on the breast tissue. And I'm like, well, it'll stay there. I would argue, I was taught by compounding pharmacists for that reason, applied to the thin skin,
right.
Inner arm, elbow, wrist, things like that to try to get it actually into the bloodstream.
And for it to actually get in the bloodstream, it can't be bound to a protein. So it's free fraction. So
right. By
the time someone uses serum protein bound to see levels change, I mean, some of that free fraction has probably gone to the liver.
Yeah.
High enough dose that some of the end products are not showing protein bound levels. But
yeah.
There's all this exposure.
Right. And then to compound and make it more difficult on that is that people feel better on topical. So we know it works to a degree. We definitely have men and women who would like, oh my gosh, changed my life. I just feel whatever they're doing, I feel so much better. But the testing is wonky.
Do you ever see some people like that feel better, let's say an androgen progesterone cream, and then they're so overloaded,
Yes.
but then their receptor sites shut down?
Yes.
They have all this
Yes.
efficiency, right?
I do see that. Yeah. And what happens is that usually, especially maybe in a more inexperienced practitioner, they just ratchet up the dose. Or if it's an over-the-counter topical progesterone cream, then she will just ratchet up the dose. She'll like, well, I was doing 1 pump.
Right.
Now I'm doing 3 because the 1 pump wasn't working. And I'm like, and you do that every day? Yes, every day. I've been doing it every day for months. I'm like, ooh, your poor receptors.
And if someone's taking, let's say, Premarin Provera, which is not actually progesterone estradiol, measuring progesterone estradiol, are we actually even getting a window of what they're actually taking impacting their tissues, or we see some of the metabolite that are converting into bioidentical afterwards? And can we even measure hormones accurately?
Not really. Premarin a little bit, not Provera to my knowledge. Premarin a little bit though, will show up, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it's like it's when the cycling women, when they're on the birth control pill and they go get their hormones tested and they're like, oh, why is it so low? I'm on the birth control pill. I'm like, well, because you're on synthetic. 1, it's shutting down all your hormone production, but 2, it's not actually replacement. It's not 1 for 1. It's not apples for apples. So it's not, if you're drawing blood for high sensitivity estradiol, like you surely are not going to find Premarin in its wholeness, and you're not going to find the birth control in there. Right. We don't have a test for that yet.
Right. So, I used to teach a class called functional endocrinology years ago, and
I think I still have your binder. I'm not going to lie.
But anyways, I remember teaching that, and then I had after not teaching for 10 years, I taught it once for Apex, one weekend, and it was just reflection. Oh, this is interesting. But people that would go to that course said it sucked. I hated it because I got more confused than ever. I became more frustrated at work, and it's I couldn't give him the clean model. This is how everything works. This is how it's done. It's all he did is confuse me more. And I just and it was well, that's not my intention. So I actually don't like to teach hormones, and I have a level of frustration with it. And I think a lot of people that maybe listen to our conversation now might see there's a lot of variables here, a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
What kind of advice could you give us?
Addressing hormones is like herding cats. I mean, you have to love it. You have to, you can't just dabble in endocrinology, as you know. That's what which is why I don't dabble in other things. If you hurt your knee, don't come to me. If you hit your head, don't come to me. If you've oncology, surely don't come to me. Because it's this is the sole thing that I focus on, instead of being a general practitioner, being able to focus on multiple things, just because of the breadth of information that I'm just trying to keep up with in the literature. And a lot of the things is just clinical experience. I've been out 17 years. And so to have 17 years of experience. So yeah, some of it is definitely anecdotal when somebody says, well, why'd you do that? I'm like, history and experience. I definitely don't have a double-blind study to back that up. I just know it's probably going to work.
Right. And
so that's hard. That's hard to convey to somebody.
Right. But maybe best of advice for people to have some degree of comfort is that's what you have to go through. You have to go through.
Yes.
You have to go through your own.
Yeah.
You gotta have the panels you're comfortable with using with. You got to do your before and afters. You got to do.
And the great thing is hormones are fixable. I have a really good friend who's in aesthetics. Speaking of anti-aging, Botox filler, that's their thing. I could never, because if I inject Botox wrong, or if I put filler in wrong, that it's massive mountains to move to fix their face. If I get somebody's hormones wrong, if I gave them the wrong adaptogen, if I just, if I tweaked their HRT in the wrong direction, they're going to call me and tell me, Carrie, I don't feel good. My hot flashes are back, or this is back, or I'm like, I got you. I can tweak that. It's not a lot, thankfully, knock on wood, it's not a lot of damage, but if you put filler in wrong, right, you're screwed. So it's fixable.
And what percentage of cases do you think working with hormone related issues is the outcome and the protocol you're doing based on the initial workup and based on how they respond? Where does that come in?
The initial workup and how,
you're done giving work, doing analysis and workup, and then you come up with some kind of protocol. are you totally comfortable with how they are with that protocol, or do you wait to see how they respond?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of a mix of both. Most of the time, just because again, I have years of experience, I'm really comfortable with their protocol and what we're going to do. But absolutely, in some people, I'm like, look, we're using this as a test. And when I was in practice, I would give them samples. I'm like, we're going to use these samples and see which direction you head. And if you head in the direction I want, then we're going to continue. We're going to use the whole bottle, or now I'm going to know what the answer is. Kind of like your immune challenges, your Th1, Th2 immune challenges that you'd have people do, but I would do it from a hormone standpoint. Is this going to work or not? And then that would also sometimes tell me if I need to dig deeper, infections, inflammation, if it's not immediately obvious just based on their symptoms and their history. If something's not working or they feel worse, I might be like, do we need to do additional, infection workup? Most of the time I've done a gut test, but if I'm like, are we looking at mold? Could this be Lyme? Some of these deeper pathogens that I will use that treatment plan to help me decide if I have to go further into that. If I didn't pick it up in the first place, if they weren't like blaringly obvious in their history to me, we should go do that.
For someone who's wanting to gain the experience and jump into hormones and develop expertise, everyone's going to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the best strategy? Do you think it's like they should start with the lab they like and then start with there and then kind of move out from there? Or
yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great strategy. Well, I also think too that hormones are the first to fail. They're the first to change. So they're like the canary in the coal mine, and then they're the last thing to get better. So learning endocrinology is a lot of, I think, fun. But we know that hormones are responsive to absolutely everything around it. So I would have people call me at Dutch and say, here's their entire hormone profile. And oh, by the way, they have gas, bloating, constipation, whatever. I'm like, well, go do a gut test. What's wrong with you? You can work on their hormones. You can give them a Band-Aid, sure. But until you get to that, fix that gut, good luck. They're always going to be a mess. So yes, I agree. I think you should pick a test and start to learn it. Actually run it on yourself. Wherever you are in life, run it on yourself. That's probably the first thing ever. You will learn the most about yourself, and then branch out to your family members, your staff, and just get the repeated experience. Call the lab. All the labs do consults. They're all free. Do their free webinars. Especially if you're just dipping your toe in, there's a lot of free resources out there that these labs offer, and go for it. And then you can expand from there. Then there are entire conferences around, endocrinology. The supplement companies, a lot of the supplement companies have great education. Of course, just like the lab, they're going to push their supplement, but a lot of their basis and basics are fantastic when it comes to understanding endocrinology. And then it'll at least give you a start on like, well, what supplement do I start with? That one. Just start with that one. Get experience using that one.
And I would just add to what you're saying, it's okay to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah,
everyone feels uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
It's just part of the process. Like, it's not going to be totally perfect. And
absolutely. Well, since moving away from Dutch and over to Rupa Health, so Rupa is just this broad platform. It offers all the labs. So I've gone from, as Mark at Dutch used to say, an inch wide and a mile deep, right? I was all hormones all the time. Now people ask me all sorts of questions, mold and Lyme and, SIBO and neuro stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I have a lot of learning to do. Yeah. So I'm dipping my toe into all these different categories. Just like I used to refer out for it. And now I'm like, dang, I guess I got to learn a whole lot of new testing. So it's been really fun, but I'm totally a newbie at a lot of these areas.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't know you're the, what's your position? You're
head of medical education. Yeah. Head of medical education at Rupa. Speaking of education.
Fantastic. Okay. And the Rupa has education, I saw on the website.
Rupa does. Yeah, Rupa does. So they do free live classes. It's for practitioners, free to sign up, and then launching into 6-week boot camps over labs specifically. So while the labs have a lot of great education, Rupa is going to start bringing in outside speakers to go over conditions, labs, just a place to start. People just want to, just like we've been talking about, like we get the calls all the time. I just need to know where to start. Right. I'm so new to this. Or I'm pivoting. I've been in medicine, I get this too. I've been in medicine 30 years, but now I'm turning into, I'm running more endocrine, or mold is a thing, or I'm getting into genetics and I don't know where to start. So we're helping them where to start.
And I think for most people that are jumping into this, I would just suggest that it's okay wherever you start. Just jump in and then work your
Just
way
start.
through. Just, it's okay.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I always end with the question, what kind of advice would you give? We have two different groups of people, if we make it binary in our group, those that are new to functional medicine, those that are experienced. What was your advice to people that are new? What's your advice to people that are talented, been doing this for a long time?
So the newbies, it's like, I'm always like, welcome. Like, this is a really exciting, really great side of medicine. Obviously we need conventional medicine, but the functional medicine, I think we've already said it, just jump in, start somewhere. Don't be afraid. You're not going to screw them up too much. You can always pivot, adjust, add capsules, reduce capsules, stop protocols for a while, add protocols. It's going to be fine. You just have to take the first step. It's going to be fine. And for those that have been doing it for a while, my advice is to publish, to write, to get it out there, to be on social media, to educate, to continue to spread what you know, what you've learned, because I can't know everything. I sort of feel like you do know everything, but maybe you don't know everything. And so, right. And so the more help we have in our industry of getting that education out there for other practitioners and just for consumers,
Yeah.
We need the help. So don't be afraid to start getting out there, have your voice heard, have your pen heard.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And we got a lot of good information. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.